Greetings. On behalf of the Danube Institute, I'm Melissa O'Sullivan, Deputy Director, and I'm very pleased to welcome you this evening for what's going to be a fantastic program. We have Katherine Brodsky, who comes to us speaking about the Hollywood scene, storytelling, and even though she looks like a child, she actually is a grizzled veteran of covering this crazy scene as a correspondent for Variety for 10 years. She is a content creator, and she's the author of a new book that comes out in January of 2024 called No Apologies, How to Find Our Voice in an Age of Outrage. And what a good time for this book, Katherine. So I'm looking forward to reading it. Responding to Katherine is Hungary's own Cecilia Hazai, who is really an entrepreneur in this field. She started in 1990 with her own company called Twin Media. She's a producer, a film producer, a distributor. She started a consultancy. She represents artists and writers, one of those being Van Noor. And there's going to be an amazing 10-part television series based on his books. It's entitled Rise of the Raven, and I'm looking forward to seeing that in 2024. And we'll have a short trailer from the movie. And moderating this fantastic program is Danube Institute's own Dr. David Lloyd Dusenberry. He's a senior fellow here at the Danube Institute and co-host of the Buddha Hills podcast. And the other person involved in that is Dr. Hendricks here this evening. He's visiting professor at Eötvös-Loránd University and author of The Innocence of Pontius Pilate and I Judge No One. And he's got another book coming up this year, and maybe he can tell us a bit about that. So welcome, everyone. I'm turning the program over to David, and I look forward, along with the rest of you, to hearing what our speakers have to say. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Melissa, for the warm introductions. And my understanding is that Katherine is going to lead off with some remarks.
That is correct. Oh, okay, and the slide is here. So, thank you all for coming. And, I grew up loving movies. See, just like this monkey. And the reason I bring up the monkey is because I remember watching, it was a TV show or a movie, I don't remember which, but it was about a monkey that would review movies. He just had the golden touch, and he knew what's going to hit, what's going to be a hit, what's not. And I remember watching that movie and thinking to myself, I can be that monkey. And that's how I became a film critic. So when I first became a critic, it was back in the dot-com era, and everyone was creating websites. It was sort of the early time of new media. And I was given a gift. I was still a teen back then, actually. And I was given a gift, and it was a domain name, and I turned it into an entertainment magazine. And I basically had about 600,000 readers a month, and I did not know what I was doing. I taught myself how to code. I made it. And, it was my first sort of entry into the world of journalism in some ways. And it gave me a lot of access to things that I would never otherwise have access to. And then I ended up writing for all of these publications. And I always like to joke that I like to do things a little bit in reverse. And I did, because I started writing online, and then I went to print. And people say that print is dying, but now I guess I get to write for, both. And hopefully print doesn't die. And like Melissa said, I've been a correspondent for Variety for actually now over 12 years, I realize. So it's been a while. But, back in the early days, I'd go to these screenings, and I would definitely be the only teenage girl then. And I would get to view these movies alongside all these critics, mostly male, mostly middle-aged. And they'd recommend a lot of older movies to me, so I'd watch those movies, and I really enjoyed them. And I sort of grew up on I Love Lucy episode reruns anyways, so... And I also got to attend premieres and festivals. And I found that the 90s and 2000s were sort of, in some ways, a contemporary golden age of cinema. And we got some great movies like Pulp Fiction, Kill Bill, Django Unchained, and other movies that are not by Quentin Tarantino. So there are things like movies like Gattaca, which I think we're going to be soon living in, As Good as It Gets, Contact, Goodfellas, The Game, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, Minority Report, which we're also living in, and so on. And before that, though, we also had movies like Groundhog Day and Monty Python and the Holy Grail, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, The Graduate, Annie Hall, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Chinatown, Breakfast at Tiffany's, Cinema Paradiso, and all sorts of movies. And the difference, then, I think that those movies were not necessarily always so politically correct, especially by today's standards. And there was this sort of fearless element to them. Many of those movies and filmmakers didn't just not follow the rules, they really intentionally broke them. And I have to say, so I'm kind of an addicted user of X, formerly known as Twitter, and I once asked my followers what movies they feel couldn't be made today within the current climate. And they said, the top vote, they said many movies, but the top vote was pretty much anything by Mel Brooks. Now, that doesn't mean that they didn't find his movies incredibly funny. They just didn't think it would get made today, which would be very sad, because Mel Brooks, he's known for using satire and politically incorrect humor to make points. For example, in Blazing Saddles, the whole film is really a satire on racism and prejudice, but it also uses racial slurs and stereotypes to make some of these points. And the point is, the intention is to mock racism, but by today's standards, many of the scenes would be considered offensive. Now, The Producers, which is one of my favorites, both the movie version and both movie versions I even like, but mostly I also got to see it on Broadway. So, it mocks Nazism. And, I used to walk around and sing Springtime for Hitler sometimes, and people out of context, I think, did not understand. But also, it uses different stereotypes of different characters. And, Spaceballs is filled with jokes about race, gender, and physical appearance. So all of these movies, in some ways, are inappropriate, perhaps, but they are also there to make a point. And Mel Brooks was making some important points, pointing out the absurdity of societal norms and prejudices. But today, many of his films not only would be viewed differently, they might not even get made because they're offensive to social norms. And in some ways, there's a case to be made that, in the contemplation about what we put on screen, in some ways we moved forward. For example, at Breakfast at Tiffany's, it's a great film, and it remains a great film, and will always be one, but Mickey Rooney's portrayal of Mr. Yunoshi is considered to be a caricature of an Asian person, and that's accurate. Gone with the Wind has been criticized for its portrayal of slavery, and 16 Candles got criticism for some of their homophobic characters. Indiana Jones was insensitive to its portrayal of Indian culture, and then we have so many teen movies from the 80s that I think we look at a lot of it now differently, and particularly in the male-female dynamics. But I think we can realize all of that without necessarily having to erase those films from culture altogether, or, as has been the case lately, providing trigger warnings, as some studios have done. Let alone, as we've seen, change the content to reflect our current sensibilities, often without permission from the original creator. And that sort of brings me to question, should the audience not be trusted to know the difference? are those not historical records of the time to understand how the attitudes were during that time? And then we have movies like Tropic Thunder, for example, and we have Robert Downey Jr. literally in blackface. But it was such a great tool to point out these great absurdities. And not to mention, I think quite important, is that it was also really funny. And sometimes humor has to be outrageous to be funny. You're always trying to figure out, how close can you walk to the line? Can you cross a little bit? How much is too much? And creative expression is all about that. And so, sadly, again, this is another movie that many believe would not be made today. Same thing with something like Monty Python and The Life of Brian. The character of Stan expresses a desire to be called Loretta, and he identifies as a woman. And the scene explores the absurdity of that situation. Again, today, more than likely, that movie would not be made. But it was a very, very popular movie and a classic for people even now. And I think, to me, satire is really one of the most powerful guiding sort of tools for a healthy society. If you can I always kind of say that if you can make somebody laugh at the absurdity of their own beliefs, that's how you win the war. I think that is the most effective weapon when it comes to squashing terrible ideas. And we have, films and TV shows throughout time that have done just that, like, say, South Park. I used to think it's just a terrible show, not realizing what it was doing, and I've learned better. But it's really tragic to me that self-expression is being stifled in the way that it is. And as a journalist, I specialize in interviews a lot, so I talk to people for a living. So these are some of the people, some of the past victims, subjects that I've had. And I've also worked on movie sets and as a unit publicist, so I kind of capture the story of the production and record it, and I help get the photography and behind the scenes. And then I also produce videos. So I worked with a number of shows, studios and shows like MGM, ABC, Apple, Amazon, BBC America, and so many others. And those are some of the shows that I worked on. And in my time doing this, I've gotten to know many writers, producers, filmmakers, actors, and lots of different crew members. And I noticed a bit of a change in the industry. So writer friends of mine, they work in a writer's room, and they collaborate with other creatives where they sort of play and experiment to try come up with a good script. And they told me that they don't feel comfortable playing around anymore in many of those rooms because they're afraid that somebody's going to complain, they're going to offend somebody, and there's going to be repercussions. They might get kicked off some of the shows or ostracized, and that has actually been happening. They also tell me that filmmakers in particular, tell me that they hold their views private because they never know when they're going to step on a landmine, and an opinion would end their career before it even began. And while it's affecting a lot of up-and-coming filmmakers and content creators, it's also affecting a lot of veteran ones. Like, I know many people who are at the top of their careers, have won Oscars, and they're still afraid. So it affects everybody at all stages, from the aspiring to the Oscar-winning. And I know this because they share their stories with me all the time, because they know they can kind of talk to me. But the thing is, creativity, it requires risk. It requires occasionally sticking your foot in your mouth and getting it wrong and going a little bit off the ledge. In fact, it demands it. You can't be creative without doing that. So the truly great storytellers, they've always done this. And that's what made them great. You can be sort of lukewarm in your storytelling and create something brilliant. And you don't know where that line is until you come a little bit closer, and then, you push yourself off of it a little bit. And there were other changes as well in the industry that I was observing. For example, there'd be quota systems. So suddenly men and women would be hired in parity, but what I've noticed sometimes, a lot of times the number of applicants wasn't at parity, right? So you'd have, in one case, I knew that funding, you had about 80% of the applicants were men, 20% were women, and if all of them are equally talented and not talented, I think would it not mean that more subpar work would actually get greenlit as a result, just to, maintain quotas. And I think that would also hurt the groups that these revised systems were actually trying to help, because they would be seen as diversity hires, and so there'll be sort of this built-in hostility, which I think did not benefit those people. And I saw it firsthand as well, because people would sort of talk behind certain people's backs, and they might be wonderful, but they assumed something else. And so there's so many new rules in Hollywood that it's becoming a bit hard to keep up. Another one would be that X can't play Y, but Y can play both Y and X. And so I'm sometimes a little bit reluctant to admit that I actually studied acting at a studio that no longer sadly exists at the back of Carnegie Hall in New York City. And we had people from all sorts of backgrounds and ideologies. And acting was really a window into the soul of different people. And the whole point of acting is to play characters that are not you. You're trying to build an understanding of inner worlds, and therefore you get to know people better. It's the whole point of being an actor, is telling stories together. And same with writers. And over the past few years, I've been going through a lot of changes, and trying to free my own voice from the shackles of self-censorship, which my upcoming book talks about. And that's been a big change in my life. And once I started talking freely and openly, I just couldn't stop. And I've done so with friends, colleagues, strangers, and on movie sets, actually. And by using my own voice, I found that I was able to have much more honest conversations with the people around me, including those in the film industry. And I think it's important to realize that no matter, I know people refer to Hollywood sometimes as Hollyweird, and there's a lot of dislike towards it these days. It's not a monolith. People have all sorts of backgrounds and perceptions of the world, and it's just so much more diverse than just race or gender. They do have diversity of thought. The problem is sometimes they don't get to express it so freely, and they are not as keen on all the boxes that people try to put them in. So the more I talked to these people, the more they were open, and we had really great conversations. And I think that including more people in storytelling is not a bad thing at all. We get to explore the world from many points of views this way. We get to have a glimpse into their experiences. But we do need to be careful these tactics don't exclude people that just don't fit through some sort of a narrow window. And while I think movies and shows have always expressed ideas, politics, and judgment about the world, they have done so more with subtext rather than hitting audiences over the head as to what they should think and feel. In fact, using subtext is a much more powerful tool, because if the goal is to have the audience empathize with something, they will arrive feeling that they've arrived there on their own is going to be much more powerful, instead of feeling that they're being more, force-fed something, and then they become resistant. Another thing that's really been driving Hollywood is, of course, finances. And, unlike artists, studios are actually very, very keen on finances and are very good at it, actually. And so I'm sure everybody here has noticed an increase in franchises and remakes and a lot of them. And there's a decrease in original cinema, especially in that 20 to 40 million budget. And, globalization has actually been a driving force with some of this. Recognizable movie properties, they have a more international appeal. They translate they transcend cultural and linguistic barriers better. Comic book movies seem to do well everywhere, and action movies are very easy to translate to an international audience. Dark comedies, on the other hand, which is my favorite genre, very difficult to translate, sadly. And franchises, they're a proven property, so they have their track records, and given how high the financial stakes are, they're a good investment. And they also will allow for branding opportunities and sponsorship opportunities and all these partnerships for additional revenues. So that's part of why we're seeing such an increase in those kinds of movies and a decrease in others, because they're trying to minimize risk. And then we have technological changes. So we've seen a huge technological impact over the years. We no longer use film, so we still don't have unlimited time to make a film, but for example, you have unlimited film because everything is digital. And that might mean creatively that a director might choose to do more takes or roll longer on something to capture reaction, which could be a good thing. But, both social and the technological aspects are changing how storytelling is done in Hollywood. So I wrote an article a while back about how LED walls are transforming the industry, which was especially during COVID. That was a necessity, and it was driving innovation, as is often the case. And as a result, you had these immersive digital environments you'd capture real-world settings, and you wouldn't have to even be in the real world. And then you shoot it in a studio, and you just have these LED walls. And so you had productions like Mandalorian and Planet of the Apes. They really took to this, as well as many others. And I remember thinking when I was doing the interviews for that article, obviously the technology is very innovative. There's a lot you can do. But I was very sad because I thought, I might no longer be able to experience shooting on location one day, something that's really, important for me and for a lot of people. It's a bonding experience. It changes the storytelling, and I get to travel to, far-flung places. Like I worked on Jack Ryan, and I got to shoot that in Montreal, Morocco, Paris. So that was really fun, and there were many, many explosions that I stood way, way, way too close to. But I'm still alive, I think. But, I remember bonding during freezing nights with the crew and the cast, and we experienced so much together on location, because the location to me is a character too. And when I worked on Men in the High Castle, which is a great show, everything was so well, thought out in the art department. The actors could touch any part of set. If you picked up a newspaper, the art department actually made sure that it had articles about, from that time period that they wrote for the show. I mean, that's the level of detail. And I remember picking up a Nazi cigarette box too. And those were interesting because apparently they smoked marijuana. That explains a little bit. I mean, it was all real, and it was all research, and I think I'd really miss that, and I think a lot of people would miss that if it was just all replaced by CGI. And this is getting to be very, very much easier to generate using a particular AI technology. And the actors would really miss being on set and that authenticity that it offers them. But of course, innovation is going to happen whether we're ready for it or not, whether we want it or not. It's here. It's a fact. LED walls, they're not bad. I mean, they allow filmmakers to move through many locations in a single day, something they couldn't do before. And it allows them to maybe access locations that they otherwise wouldn't be able to shoot in because, the film crews are large, have big footprint, and this way, or there's sites that are very busy and full of people, and this way they're able to recreate them visually on stage. So there's some really great opportunities that it offers us. And it also democratizes filmmaking because it provides those who have smaller budgets an opportunity to create something in studio that they wouldn't be able to otherwise. And of course, AI is something that I've been focusing on a lot, is being introduced in the mix, and not always with the best reactions. We've had the writer's strike recently, And now the actors are still striking, and that strike might be going on actually into next year. Although AI isn't the only contention point, it is a significant one. And studios, they want to own the likeness of talent, and talent wants to remain in control of their own image. And AI is also being used to do script analysis, predict box office success. It can expect and figure out audience preferences to optimize it for greater audience engagement. But I wonder if it's also taking away our humanity in some ways and exchanging it sort of with a paint-by-numbers content that resembles fast food in a chain more than, a glass of fine wine. Not that I know what a glass of fine wine is, but when I taste one, I know. But AI can, at this point, could be used to generate entire characters. And through deep learning, visual effects experts, they can create, realistic facial expressions and movements for the characters. And it's very likely that a lot of actors are going to be replaced, especially those in the background. And I think about even the background, which many people might think, well, who cares about that? But I remember Fellini movies and how much, how the camera sort of hones in into the faces of these individuals that he cast himself because they had such distinct looks and personalities. And that was a character too. So I think that's something, that brings so much humanity that might disappear. And I think, recently I actually experimented with a piece of software, and it allowed me to translate myself talking, a video that I had. I translated it into Japanese, and I translated another one into French. It was really not bad. And it's a little weird, and I haven't gone to Hungarian yet, but eventually. But what it will do, I think, it has some positive things. That it's going to allow our stories to probably connect to everyone around the world. So you can make it in Hungarian, and it will immediately translate it in all sorts of languages, and it will overcome language barriers. And but then I wonder if all barriers have to be overcome. So, for example, there's a Czech company called Studio Paranormal, and they recently they put out a demo using generative AI, and it can change anyone's ethnicity in movies, TV shows, games. And there's a lot of talk about cultural diversity, and in some ways it could be a great tool. If maybe you're in a country where there's less diversity, but the filmmaker wants to create something that has a richer tapestry, for example, and they wouldn't be able to cast those people, that's something they can do. But on the other hand, there is a part of me that thinks, well, that's kind of digital blackface, maybe. So I'll let you decide for yourself. So this is the demo, and you can turn, it allows you to turn pretty much any ethnicity, although it does some better than others. As I'm looking at it, the white is particularly pale. But why even bother hiring someone if you can just change their appearance? And how does the person whose appearance is being changed feels about it? And then, some people might think, well, this is not really any different than putting on a costume or having an animator create a new character. So I think it's important to note that while these technological advances can be very impressive, and I think there's no doubt that this is very impressive, they also bring a lot of moral and ethical challenges that we need to address and talk about. And we don't always talk about these things so openly. And right now, this technology, it's early days, and it's going to continue getting so much better over time. And not only, changing race, but also aging people, de-aging, bringing actors back to life, and reviving the dead. I think that's pretty controversial. Something that's, particularly at the heart of the current actor strike. How much of the likeness do studios get to own and use? What about the people who've died before this technology was even available, and now their estate is signing this off without their permission? how much is technology taking away from our own authenticity as humans? And no doubt the whole model of storytelling has changed. So when streaming platforms took over, they really disrupted the traditional release models. So you have all these subscription services like Netflix, Amazon Prime, Apple TV, Disney, and they grew their audiences by tempting people with shows onto their platforms that are very bingeable. And a lot of the content, they don't produce that much original content, so there's shorter demand for that. And instead, they license a lot of content. And sometimes that's good news, right? Because, maybe somebody's holding a catalog with a lot of older content, or, there is a lot of foreign films and TV shows that now people are exposed to because of these streaming platforms that they otherwise would probably never be watching. But that also means that there is less content that's coming out. And there's also far fewer shows that make it past, season 1 or 2. So if you have a favorite show, it's probably going to get canceled if it hasn't been already. So not only people are getting canceled, shows too. And these platforms, what also is happening, it's leading to more fragmented viewing. So there's something for anyone, but there's nothing that's really, or at least there's not much that's for everyone. So it's great, and on the one hand, you can have a neat show that you can, an audience member can stumble across and it can find its own audience. But on the other hand, there's far less that unites us all. And then you have shrinking theatrical windows. So you don't have, with some exception, like there's some movies that never even make it to theaters, except for, when they're trying to qualify for Oscar screenings, nominations. There's not so much of a movie event phenomenon. Although we have seen a few exceptions recently, like these two, Oppenheimer and Barbie. There's a lot of people who dressed up in pink, so and then there was a big debate to go see the double bill or to just go see Barbie or Oppenheimer. So who knows, maybe Barbie is going to save us all. But this is something that we're really seeing across all content, right? This kind of fragmentation. There's podcasts, they play only to certain types of audience. There's Substack subscriptions that are on very niche topics. There's conservative studios that produce content that's just conservative as a kind of a counter-reaction to the more liberal studios. And this technology is helping them accomplish this at a much slower cost. And there's more opportunities for independent content creators to tell their stories regardless of their, ideologies, and they can do it outside the studio system. And in many ways, that is a good thing because it's a decentralization of storytelling. But at the same time, I think as we're gaining something, I think we're also losing something. We just don't have so much that speaks to us collectively. And when we don't have that, I think it causes more division. It causes us to speak to each other less. We are missing shared cultural references that bring us closer together. And I've seen the same thing happening with media outlets, especially as a journalist. But people used to read maybe the same paper, and they had a shared sense of the reality of the world, what's happening in the world. Now you can sort of click on specific headlines and only read the stories that you want to read, which offers you more choice, but at the same time, you're missing something about the bigger picture. We get to pick and choose, but then we miss something about that larger canvas. And while I know that there are many people who wonder, why should we even care about, this thing called Hollyweird, as they say, I think it's type of storytelling that's an extension of us. It's a window that goes into the broader world and gives us access to stories, experiences, emotions, and perspectives that we might otherwise never encounter on our own, or at least not as easily. It's also a forum that should allow us to challenge ideas and build empathy. And to some extent, it also shapes how we see the world, no less than, media But as the great Stan Lee has said, as a narrator of the Spider-Man comic, with great power comes great responsibility, which was echoing Churchill when he said, where there is great power, there is great responsibility. Kind of similar. Apparently, a lot of people think it's actually Uncle Ben who said it, but I was fact-checking this presentation and learned that this was in fact Stan Lee. But anyways, so what is this great responsibility anyway? I think the great responsibility is to tell the truth the best that we can. And I think that is a responsibility that should be shared by any artist or storyteller, no matter what gets in the way, whether it's politics, bias, your mom or dad, best friend, or a mob that wants you to adhere to a particular orthodoxy. Your primary responsibility as an artist is to tell the truth of what you observe in the world in the creative ways that you might do it. Look, in our daily lives, we often choose to be a little bit more delicate with our words. We want to avoid hurting people, fit in better. But when it comes to creative expression, we can't afford to neuter our vision. Otherwise, you let other people decide what is true, what is offensive, and what can and cannot be said. And I'm definitely not advocating for carelessness, quite the opposite. I think that whatever tools you decide to use to express yourself, be it words, music, visuals, or a combination of all of them, you have to be precise in your intentions. You have to be careful in how you use the tools that you have. But at the end, you must tell the truth as you see it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katherine, for those very suggestive and stimulating remarks. I believe we're now going to see a trailer before Cecilia then offers her reply. And this is the trailer that Melissa already mentioned for a forthcoming 10-part television series based on a book by the author Bon Noor, titled Rise of the Raven, expected next year.
There has never been a production of this scale in Europe. Well, this saga begins some 10 years ago when my co-producers sent me a thrilling and a suspenseful and an extraordinary story of János Hunyadi's life, which is what our epic saga is about. The biggest challenge was finding the stars who would have both the acting chops and the charisma and the looks and the camera presence to hold the viewers for 10 hours, and we found them all. The casting of Rise of the Raven took about 2 years, and I think the international stars, they kind of the perfect mix to bring this story to the screen in a way in which it had authenticity and contemporary appeal. This is a historically true story, which has all of the intrigue, the passion, the betrayal, the seduction, the courage of something like Game of Thrones without the dragons. But the story changed the course of the world.
Mi Magyarország kormányzója, alávetem magam a nemzet akaratának.
Fantastic. Well, could I welcome Cecilia to the floor to offer her reply?
Is this working? Yes, it is. So this is, as you just mentioned, the fun, of a film shoot. Well, that was fun. 174 days of shooting, 2.5 years in the writer's room, pre-production, all of that. No artificial intelligence. Everything handwritten and acted. So this is what I like. We never even considered artificial intelligence, which I see as a great danger to creation, to filmmaking, and any other creation. Starting with the scripts. Copyright can only be granted to a human under the current legal environment. So once a script doesn't have a copyright owner, it cannot be monetized. So the whole industry is in shambles. And I don't even understand why the studios don't undertake more aggressive action against artificial intelligence, because they're digging their own grave. I don't know what the word is about that in Hollywood. Why are they not
Well, they're
more
fighting
aggressive?
for it, right? They're not, the writers are fighting against it, but the studios want to be able to use it. Some writers do want to be able to use it, but not in such an extreme way. They certainly want to retain their copyright and creativity.
So there's also word of a certain percentage. If, let's say, 25 or 35% of a script is artificial intelligence, then the rest can still be credited to an author. And they're talking about the percentages. I think they're just, what it seems to me, this whole process is they're trying to drag it out, not take a stand. Let's see which way it goes to benefit the most of it. But you would know that better.
Do you know the book Save the Cat? Yeah, it's such a canon, and for screenwriters, they'll read this book, and it tells them, okay, you have to save the cat by a certain point in the movie, and so it's kind of a step-by-step guide how to write a movie that's going to sell in Hollywood. But in some ways, it is a paint by numbers sort of situation where sometimes you want to break those rules. I mean, if you look at some of the best movies, they're all movies that strayed away from that convention, like the best things do. But you have even a generation of writers who grew up on that book, and I've read it. I mean, you're told to read it. But with AI, it's trying to really make something, because it's calculating, how are people going to perceive this? And it probably is effective, for example, at predicting box office success based on its analysis of the script. But then you're only going to see movies in the culture who pass that. And there's some movies that are so bad that they're good. And sometimes they, years later, like The Room, for example, would be, have you seen it? No, it's a very bad movie. It really is a very bad movie. But
What's the name?
The Room.
The Room. It looks so
It's
depressing.
a cult.
Huh?
Yeah, it's a cult following movie. It is truly, truly a terrible movie. But when you go see it, but it became like a hit because people like to go see it. It's an event. Or Rocky Horror Picture Show. That movie didn't do that well at first, and then suddenly it became like an event series. So there's a lot of examples like that. There's movies that were like niche movies because only certain people embrace them, but they changed their lives. And those movies would not get made.
Mm-hmm.
David?
Ask questions?
Oh, yeah, no. So, well, but surely, just to come in where we left off, surely an AI could be consulted and an algorithm could be put to use very easily to, say, create the cult film which will tank for 3 weeks and then survive and thrive for 35 years, right? Don't you think a formula could be found for exactly that?
I don't, but I do think I think people overestimate what AI can do.
So why not? Why could it not? When you have access to like whole, not only like, kind of majority or, median viewerships, but niche viewership like data. on their private streaming services, on their YouTube usage.
I mean, it can imitate
BitTorrent.
it really well. And I have to say, there was somebody who said, "Can you rewrite the ending of Thelma and Louise? How would you end it differently?"
That's a prompt I like, actually.
I actually put, well, it wasn't meant to be a prompt for AI. I used it,
Okay,
and then I wrote, and it generated a script. And that script, I sent it to the person. He said, "I love you. It's so good." And I didn't know what to say at that point.
You love it.
But I think AI is, I mean, it can fool people. I think, especially people who don't know what good writing is. It can fool us, but sometimes it comes up with interesting ideas, like because it has access to so much more knowledge than we do. So at a certain point, you're able to, you can use it to sort of generate some ideas or inspiration, but it takes so long to get a good one.
Well, I mean, one could also comment that two of the greatest movies, one of the 80s and one of the, I think, 2020s. I mean, the Blade Runner franchise. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned franchises, and everyone kind of, loathes, all right-thinking people loathe the Hollywood franchises. Yeah. That is as it should be. But the Blade Runner franchise, or, sequence, is actually pretty interesting and pretty serious. And it explores precisely this question of how endlessly fascinating, in fact, machine phenomena can be.
And how dangerous, because in the end it eats you up. So I think it should be handled with much caution. The writing is one thing, and then when it comes to the acting, that's an even more delicate issue. Changing people's faces and looks and voices, this can create super dangerous situations. So. And I think the actors should stand up and fight, and that's exactly what they're doing. They're on strike, and they're not ready to let go. They just said a couple of days ago they'd rather stay on strike than go back to work.
But the writers, they negotiated their deals a little bit quicker. But I remember watching, there was a Dove ad featuring Audrey Hepburn, Dove chocolate. And I watched it, and it was very kind of beautiful, shot, at a different time period. But then I'm looking at it, something isn't adding up. And I also was thinking, why would Audrey Hepburn, of all people, do an ad, and especially an ad for Dove chocolate? I mean, she could at least pick better chocolate. So, and turns out, Dove chocolate didn't even exist in her time. So that was all generated. And so I'm just thinking, like, if I was Audrey Hepburn, which I'm not, I would never want that. That is not something I would ever consent to. But obviously her estate did consent to this. And I think that's very troubling.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
And I'm a little bit more optimistic about AI in some ways in terms of creativity. I think we can do I've seen some beautiful work that was done with prompts. It does democratize that process so much. People can make something just on their computer and just be very creative if they're doing the right kind of story. But with like any technology, it can be as good, evil, in between. And often we're just not thinking through as to what's going to happen in the future. We're just going ahead with it. We don't have any protection mechanisms, and now we're seeing the strikes. With art, a lot of people use AI to generate artwork, and how does AI know how to make it? Obviously humans, because that's the data it was trained on, and none of them are getting royalties. So things like that, I think, and it's going to be a very difficult field also to legislate and to also, copyright infringement, things like that.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it's fundamentally a kind of parasitic technology, and we don't often describe it that way. But it is living off the great well of human production and human imagination and human linguistic expression and so on and so forth.
And in some ways, I always say that I think in some ways AI is going to redefine what it is that is special about us as humans. What is it that makes us humans that we can do better than a machine? Because we're all going to have to figure that out because, AI is coming for every field. I think the really interesting thing about it and the impactful aspect about it is that people have been replaced in many, many jobs over the years, right? So that's nothing new. The difference here is that the scale of which it's going to do and how many occupations is going to affect all at once. But that's why we do have to sort of really redefine what is it that makes us human, what's our special it, and what is it that an AI can't do. And I think there was I'm trying to think of the name of the comedian. There's a really funny comedian, but he was dead. And somebody prompted AI to write something. Is it Carlyle? Yeah. Anyways, somebody prompted the AI to write something in his style. And his daughter, George Carlin, and his daughter was so offended by it. Because it imitates, but it doesn't. To create something, like human beings do create something from scratch, right? Because at some point we had nothing and now we have something. So AI had to use something that was created by humans to create what it's doing. And it doesn't have, like when a human writes something, they're writing something from their point of view, their experience, their impressions, their inspirations from other art. AI is only, maybe inspirations and impressions of other art, but it doesn't have the experience that a human has that causes them to express something.
I think what the most important thing that is missing from artificial intelligence is the human heart.
What is
a machine can't feel, can't cry, can't laugh.
But it can pretend to very well. And I think a lot of people do. I think we have a tendency as human beings to project our feelings onto inanimate objects like teddy bears and others. And so to some human beings, it will be sufficient. And we have to recognize that. So we think that we can't imitate it, but it can imitate it quite well. And sometimes that works for people.
And this is the answer that Philip K. Dick offers. And you've worked on a Philip K. Dick series, so I'm sure you know all about him. But in Blade Runner, ultimately it's empathy, it's compassion that differentiates humans from replicants. But I want to use that, if I may, to segue, because one of your themes was satire, right? Yeah. And the ability to kind of draw out a certain level of truth by ridiculing or puncturing illusion. And there's actually an element in this very famous novel, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, written by Philip K. Dick, which becomes Blade Runner, the Blade Runner franchise. And so there is a news show which runs 24 hours a day, Buster something and his friendly friends, I think. It runs 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And there's an endless stream of new fascinating content. How does this happen? Well, Buster and his friendly friends are replicants. They're non-humans. And so one of the crucial kind of moments in the novel, which is totally lacking in the movie, is that they do an expose on the religion of the book, which is Mercerism, which is a religion of compassion, which is the one thing that unites humans to all other living beings and to each other, and it also makes them capable of despair. This is interesting. Machines are incapable not only of love, but of despair, which is kind of a terrifying thing in its own way. Anyway, but here's my question. So if we're talking about, the heart being what machines are lacking and the rise of AI, wouldn't it be, even if there is something kind of very important and very valuable in humans engaging in satire, wouldn't there be something distinctly creepy in using AI systems to basically ridicule deeply held human values and human beliefs and human experiences? A dark comedy written by...
they do it already. If you do the right prompt, it will absolutely mock humans. But it doesn't have, emotion. It's interesting because machines are designed to be sort of perfect in a way, right? And because they don't have emotions that make them lose their cool, I kind of think of them as psychopaths, actually. But psychopaths can be very effective as, surgeons and people who don't have high stress reactions, right? You can be actually very capable. I was thinking of writing something where it was a whole thing ran by psychopaths, essentially, but they don't go to war because they're just practical and logical. And machines are like that. But when it comes to art is not logical and practical. It's usually, so much of it comes out of pain. A strong emotion is what generates art, right? Like when you have inspiration, whether it's a piece of music or a movie or a piece of writing, most of it is coming often out of pain, actually, more than I think out of joy, sadly. But that is the reality of it. And machines don't have that. And satire comes from an observation of the world that I think is rooted to some extent in pain.
I was wondering, Cecilia, with the project you've been working on, which seems, I don't know the books, but it seems to be dealing with kind of national history and regional history. And I was also curious some of the dangers of sort of handing over the epic of a people to AI, where these are events of a past which matter very deeply, and the retelling of them is a fundamentally human project.
Absolutely. We're talking the early 15th century. Our hero is born right around 1408, and we follow him until the big Battle of Belgrade in 1456, where he defeats the huge Ottoman Empire that was able to lay siege to Constantinople and it's still under Turkish rule. So our hero defeated this army, and well, the story is full of political intrigue and love and friendship and hatred, the usual, epic historic television. And most people don't know, educated Christian people don't know why the church bells ring at noon. Do you know?
Please enlighten me.
I'm shocked.
Well, it's to remember this very battle, 1456. Pope Calixtus III asked every church to ring the bells in support for the poor Hungarian army, which is to fight against this mighty Ottoman army. And then this becomes the noon bell. Voila. Over 500 years later, it's still there. Huh?
Do you find that there's different sensibilities when it comes to Hungarian sort of film storytelling? What would you say are the most major differences versus Hollywood?
Well, Hungarian film is. You look at a Hungarian film, it's Hungarian. It's in the making, in the visuals, in the storytelling. There's a big difference, and so we wanted to be different than that. We have a very international side to it, with all the international actors, with all the visuals. Nobody will say, "Oh, this is a Hungarian production," from the visual perspective. I think there is no such thing as Hungarian film, Swedish film, Brazilian film. I think the people have become much more open to all kinds of content, and this is thanks to Netflix. Suddenly in Brazil you can watch Norwegian shows and Romanian shows, and this was actually a very big surprise to the creative community, that people are actually reading subtitles. This comes we have bigger screens at home, hence the subtitles are bigger, easier to read, and just Netflix opened the world. Today's audience is just captive for every kind of content. So
I find that, with subtitles, I personally prefer movies with subtitles. I don't like the dubbing. I know my parents grew up at a time where dubbing was very common, and they were getting a lot of international films at the time, but they would just be dubbed. I like to retain the sort of authenticity of subtitles. But it's interesting to me that I do think it makes our world smaller when you have these opportunities to glimpse into the windows of these worlds. And I agree with you, like Netflix did do such a service, but it's also interesting that people were willing to reach out and watch these movies. Maybe they were running out of things, but
I think that the audience was just underestimated. Nobody will ever watch this show because it's subtitled. No, people are interested. The concept in our show is that, for example, the Turkish Sultan is a Turkish actor, and he speaks Turkish in the series. Because it would be ridiculous. Why would he speak Hungarian? The Pope is Giancarlo Giannini. He will speak Italian. The Habsburgs are German actors. They speak German. So the challenge was for some of our Hungarian actresses, they had to learn a bunch of languages. Like Franziska Törőcsik, she's the daughter of the Serbian despot. She had to learn Serbian. Then she comes into the harem of Sultan Murad. She had to learn Turkish. So then other ladies had to learn German, who were to wed with the Habsburgs.
So it's such a contrast from a lot of the American films where they'll hire actors who do not speak remotely the language and kind of stutter through it.
Including English, Americans who don't really speak English.
British actors know English better than Americans. Yeah, no, I had a show I really loved is The Americans, and this is a show where they actually had, because it's about a Russian sleeper spy cell, and they actually hired Russian-speaking actors to play the Russian characters, and as they also spoke English pretty well, but it was so, because it made it so much more authentic. But maybe there's something more removed about the U.S., whereas in Europe you have all these countries around you, so I imagine that must influence the filmmaking process a bit.
Yeah, for that we were lucky that we could hire all these actors, and they were all willing to play their part, and they were very happy, and we have a big cast. Our main producer who spoke on the reel, Robert Lantush, lives in
Canadian.
Canada.
I know him, yeah.
Robert. He's of Hungarian origin, and I gave him the book some 12 years ago to read, and he said, "Leave me alone, I hardly read Hungarian anymore. The last time I read Hungarian was I was 7-year-old." Okay. Finally, he reads the book, and 2 weeks later, he was like, "Hey, send me the rest of the books, and I'm in on the project." This is how it went. And we were casting the characters, the main actors, and the supporting actors. Robert was so surprised that the actors actually knew their lines. He said, "You cast actors in America or Canada, they would read their text."
I will disagree with Robert Lantus on the record. Maybe I worked with actors who remember the lines a little bit better, but
he was so surprised. I wouldn't know,
So in just a moment, I think we're going to open our conversation, which is so wonderful, to questions from the floor. I wanted to ask, so you opened your remarks with looking at some of Tarantino's old films, back from the classics. But that also brought to mind one of his most recent films, or his most recent, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which also made me think of the fact that Hollywood has some really great films about Hollywood, all of which are quite dark. So Sunset Boulevard and Mulholland Drive, David Lynch, which is very dark and interesting. But so I was curious, do you have any thoughts on the fact that Tarantino, he used an alternate history. He used the lies of an alternate history to tell some sort of truth, I think, about his view of America, recent American history. it was quite successful, and he used two sort of, unreconstructed, a bit unpolished male characters to convey his.
He did it
his
in
vision.
Inglourious Bastards as well, right? He seems to like alternative history. But I think, as the last quote in my presentation said, artists use lies to tell the truth. And I think, I guess that's what he does. But I find he's one of those filmmakers, by the way, where I think even if the movie is sort of imperfect, like Django Unchained, I loved 3/4 of it. I thought it was the perfect movie. Could have ended. Please don't tell Tarantino I said that.
That's off the record.
Off the record. Please don't anyone tell anybody. But I think he's one of those filmmakers that even if it's not like perfect, you have that such an experience with it that you wouldn't. Only he can make it, and AI can't make it. Only him. But revisionist history, is your question more about, is that okay?
Well, but I guess I was also thinking, because, you're very concerned, as I think we all are, that kind of storytelling is being blunted and, the more interesting characters are being edited out. But I mean, in recent years, The Joker was also an interesting film. I'm thinking of True Detective, which that's not a film, but it's an interesting HBO series, which always revolves around these kind of not entirely, smooth and civilized characters. And I guess I'm wondering whether, in a sense, the market itself occasionally resists some of the tendencies that you're worried about.
Yeah, I think occasionally the market does resist because I think the population overall, this is my hunch, is that the population overall, they want these imperfect characters because they represent the world better. They don't want perfectly packaged comic book movies. I mean, they do because they go see them and they generate a lot of money. But I think there's also a thirst for something else. And the imperfect characters are how we learn about ourselves because we're not perfect. So I do see some resistance. It's just much harder from the people that I talk to. It's just much harder to make a movie that doesn't quite fit a particular content agenda, as I'll call it. And so there's a lot. This is what worries me because I do think there is a lot of storytelling that is being lost because there is a suppression. There's this desire. You can only have characters who are nice, who are not racist, but they're characters. They're not, and so I think it is neutering storytelling. I just see a little bit of resistance to it. I think we see a lot more of the resistance in television. Television is a lot darker and more gritty, and there's a lot more opportunities there. In movies, I'm not seeing nearly as much of it. I don't know if that's your experience as well.
I think generally, if you compare the small screen to the big screen, it's two different things. Television has, the movies have suffered recently, and COVID didn't help, and the current situation isn't great. Big name A-list stars have migrated to television, to miniseries, and with all the streaming, now television has become a more appreciated medium, I would say, or it reaches more people. People don't go to the movies so often anymore here, and in America it's even worse. As you said, Barbie and Oppenheimer were the exception, and they'll save this year for Hollywood, I think. This whole writer's strike cost the nation $5 billion, the economy.
People don't think about how much impact it actually has on the economy. It's a huge industry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is everything, the hairdressers, the makeup artists, the this and the that, and the catering. 3/4 of Hollywood were out of a job for 6 months.
And then you have all the suppliers too. So economically, the Hollywood film industry in general has a huge footprint. So that isn't a small thing. it affects so many people from different areas. It is sad to see that less people are going to movie theaters, including myself. But I remember Titanic was such a movie event. Lord of the Rings. Now those are big blockbuster movies, but there was something really great and exciting about a group of people getting so excited about this one film. Everybody talked about it. Everybody was excited about it, and that shared experience, I think, it does unite people in many ways. And, they're not talking about politics. They're talking about fictional characters, and these fictional characters are bringing them together. And I think it creates a sense of community, which I think is something that we've really lost over the years. I think we have a lot less community in general, and I think art and culture does contribute to it.
I think fundamentally what I hear the most frequently as a criticism, the content is not good enough. Why would I go see a movie that I'm not excited about? That's the fundamental problem.
It is a problem, which I hope people will solve, but I think there needs to be a change in
the best example is these two movies. Those were two titles. People got excited about them and they went to the movie theater.
Well, there's a question I wanted to ask about why so many great American writers go to Hollywood and totally fail as screenwriters, like, William Faulkner and so on and so forth. But I won't ask that question. I think the time has come to open it to the floor.
Yeah.
A microphone is making its way.
Oh, sure. So first, Jeremy Carl, Senior Fellow at Claremont Institute, visiting here at Danube. First, two quick questions, one for both of you, and then one just for Elizabeth. I was interested in your initial comments. You mentioned The Life of Brian as a movie that probably wouldn't be made today, but you didn't focus on the treatment of Christianity, which is why it almost didn't get made 40 years ago. You mentioned transgenderism, and so I'm interested in what your views are on the way Hollywood treats Christianity today, and then contrast that with you're sort of doing a Christian epic in Hungary and how that's treated in Hungarian film. Second question, I have a book coming out early next year that has a chapter that looks at kind of the rise of anti-white discrimination in Hollywood. You sort of touched on the quota system that is out there, and I'm curious as to, from your insider perspective, whether you see that as kind of, has it peaked, is it going up, is it staying steady, and how it's manifesting itself.
I'll answer the second question first, because I like to do things in reverse. But do I think that that cultural issue is getting worse or better? I think it's going to eventually turn on its head because there's so many people who are not happy with it, based on my experience in conversations. There's so many people who feel like they've been shut out, and they're not hearing. And those were like the same people who were probably advocating for more inclusion. And I think inclusion is great. I think there was like lots of people who were excluded. It's just that things went way too much the other way around, and I just don't think we should. I think we should be finding systems to be more blind and just look at talent and allow more people to tell stories rather than like forcefully creating. And an example I use is in orchestras. They found that women were very underrepresented. So they started doing auditions where they put up a curtain. And it wasn't really changing, things weren't really changing. And then they realized because the women were wearing heels and they would make clicking noises. So there's biases and things like that that people have built in. And then they put carpet there. And it totally did change things, right? Like there was more kind of equal representation, but it didn't come about because of forcing something, like not hiring someone based on their inherent quality, but rather because they have the talent and taking away the bias. So I think that in Hollywood and in all industries, we really should be looking at how do we eliminate the biases that might keep some people out through these kinds of ways. And then Christianity, I have to admit, I probably don't pay enough attention. So that's probably why I made it. And that clip from A Life of Brian was going around a lot. And it was quite funny. But I do think I think what I've noticed is that when a movie has inherently Christian themes, it puts it in a category. And I don't think that was the case some years ago. I have seen movies that had Christian themes, and I would just probably just not really think about it. And it wasn't put in its own category. And now immediately it becomes like an outsider. So I do see that. I don't know if that will turn around soon.
Well, there was about 10 years ago, this producer couple, I forget their name, they're at MGM now. They made this television series about the Bible, which suddenly was such a huge hit. And then the Hollywood community woke up. It's like, this is a segment of an audience that is completely underserviced. So then a couple movies came again straight after this. Because and there was still the better days of the movie going, so they were all theatrically released, and they were successful. Now, in our show, the Christian element is obviously an important element. In those days, we fought the Ottoman Empire because they were Muslims and we were Christians. This is a topic, obviously, but it's a political agenda. They wanted to invade our territory. No matter what their religion was, we had to defend our land. And the single most important motive in those days was Christian belief. So it's there in the show. It's subtext, it's texture, it's there.
I'll also add that I actually worked on a show for Hallmark called One Calls the Heart, and it was based on a writer who's a Christian writer, Jeanette Oak. It was very interesting because that show took off. I think we have 10 seasons there, and it had this whole huge community. They would have fan conventions. People would fly to the set, and they would come, and they were just so adorable. But it was. They really found a lot of success. Now, it wasn't overtly Christian, but it was definitely speaking to a Christian audience. So, like you said, there's so much thirst and interest. But studios, I think, are a little bit, big studios are a little bit scared of touching it.
I haven't seen the second season, but the first season of The Young Pope is really extraordinary. And I think that series did well.
I think when they make the stories a little darker, a little more gritty, I think there's a lot more appeal. It becomes a little bit more mainstream.
I believe we have another question here.
Yes, thank you very much, Ákos Benceget. So the first question is to Katherine, so that you can think a bit, waiting for the other question. Sorry? Yes, I'm Ákos Benceget from Danube Institute, in charge of foreign affairs. Actually, we already met with Katherine. So the question is, you spent some time in Budapest now, some months, and what is the topic you would make a movie about? That's why I gave you some time. And the second question would go to Mrs. Hazai. This is on this Christian element. Nowadays, it can be perceived as a kind of fight among civilizations, the Muslim and the Christian civilization, and it's a quite politically incorrect topic. So my question would be, you told that this is history, and this is in fact history, but how much the current political context influenced you and your colleagues during the movie making? Did you have to insert some nuances, which is necessary nowadays?
I understand your question. No,
take your time.
This was very clear from the very beginning. We are not reflecting on politics, actual politics of today. We are telling a story. We're telling this story of this time. And we're not depicting the Ottomans as barbarians and dirty and uncultured. To the contrary, they're extremely civilized. They have wonderful palaces and baths, and they dress in silk, and they have all their rituals. The only problem with them was that they had a different political agenda, and that involved invading our country. So our conflict is very clear. It's a political conflict. We're defending our country, and we're not trying to get rid of a religion or kill them because they have a different faith. Absolutely not.
Okay, I've got an answer to your question. I've got two now, okay? And don't take it wrong. I'm just practicing my freedom of speech here, and I like Budapest, but I just think it would make a good movie. One would be a satirical comedy about a bunch of bureaucrats at a think tank. And the other one, trying to navigate things, keep things civil. And the other one would be about young people in a coffee shop. And that would be like more of a comedy kind of style. And they're working in a coffee shop and kind of dealing with the changes in Hungary and the culture.
Did I miss it? Did you say what genre your think tank movie would it be?
Satire.
Horror or comedy or
Satire, but really some might see it as a horror. Depends on how much paperwork you have to fill out.
Please. Yeah.
Hi, Wael Taji Miller, Danube Institute. So I have a question for Cecilia and also for you, Katherine, about the writer's strike and AI. Because I think this is a topic that you explored, but we didn't really get to the core of that. So there's a lot of people saying right now that, well, AI will never be able to replace writers. But if that was really true, I don't think they would be freaking out as much as they are. And in fact, I have a bit of a dark sense of humor myself. Before the current war, I asked an early access version of GPT-4 to make me a sitcom script that involved an Italian-American family moving to Gaza to start a pineapple pizzeria type thing. And it was like Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, but extremely dark with lots of explosions. And that was extremely funny and made me and my friends laugh for hours and hours and hours. So I mean, anyone who's saying that this stuff can't work, they just haven't tried it out enough. They haven't seen what it can do. So I have to ask you, given the capabilities, how do you think we can have a good resolution to this writer strike situation where we're using AI to at least some degree because we kind of have to, but also not excluding the human element that you talked about so much?
Yeah, the agreement between the writers and the studios has been done a couple weeks ago. They agreed. The AI element is left completely open. It can be used, but it's okay not to use it. So it's completely vague how they refer to this question. Of course, anybody can, throw in elements and create a script, but the fundamental problem is it cannot be copyrighted. A script can only be copyrighted to a human being. And if it's not copyrighted, then it's in the public domain. And then how are you going to monetize it?
Yeah,
and this is the business. You own a piece of intellectual property, and you make money off it.
Yeah, I guess I have, my view is, I think it could be used as a tool. I think I use AI, ChatGPT, and some other tools as a way to write things. They don't write things for me. I use them as a tool to help me write things. I think it's going to replace certain kind of writing. I don't think you can make a mediocre script. I don't think, even though your idea, and by the way, keep in mind that this idea that you described, that you put, that was your imagination. That was your creativity that you had to prompt it with. And this is how I see the relationship between AI and humans. You can use it. It's the same thing. I can't draw, but I can use a tool and I can use my imagination. I can say I can come up with the idea. So I don't think we're going to discard it. First of all, I don't think we can. So we have to figure out how to use it as a tool. But I don't think we're going to be at a stage where it's going to write a script that's just going to be like a brilliant script. It's going to pass. It's going to be doable. Like my ending to Thelma and Louise, it honestly read pretty well. If I asked you to write the whole script, I don't think we'll ever get a Thelma and Louise out of it. That's my point of view on it.
Could I just ask a question, though? I mean, you know, your stress on truth, which I think that in and of itself is arguable, whether art is about telling the truth, but let's go with that.
Truth as we see it.
The truth as we see it, the truth as we experience it, the truth as we feel it to be, all of these things which go into the human, the human confrontation with truth. But I'm just curious, I mean, I think a very serious argument could be made to the effect that machines can neither tell the truth nor lie. And so, in a sense, is anything derived from this sort of parasitic use of machines, however interesting it might be phenomenally, is it actually lacking your criterion of art at its core?
I mean, in some ways, machines, you can attempt to create a machine that's going to be more truthful than a person, but so far, that's not really happening because it's using data from humans. And unfortunately, what's going to happen is actually it's going to be using data from machines over time because a lot of the data already is generated by machines. So that judgment of truth, I don't think the machine will be able, but I don't know, Elon Musk is trying to create a truth GPT. We, as human beings, we don't necessarily tell the truth, and we lie sometimes, but I think we are artists are trying to tell at least what they see in the world, and that to me is the truth. A machine doesn't see anything in the world, it just borrows from other entities. So in that way, I don't know, I don't think it's quite, it doesn't have a point of view, it's just kind of, it's just using algorithms, so.
In which case, I mean, we talk about deep fakes, but in which case all of this stuff would be, according to your idea of art kind of handing on or expressing truth, all of this machine-generated art would be fake art, right?
Well, it's also, not necessarily, because I think it's, you use whatever, I mean, when you tell any kind of fictional story, you're lying to your audience in some way because you're painting a picture that doesn't exist. All of these things didn't happen.
But you know the difference between fabulating and not, right? This is the difference between pathology and imagination.
Explain it to me like
a novelist who doesn't know he's creating his story is not a novelist. You're dealing with a lunatic.
Yeah.
And so you're
so the machine is a lunatic.
The novelist is self-consciously doing something. Machines are not self-consciously doing anything.
No, the machines are just doing what the human told them to do, and then they're doing it in their own way based on programming and based on all the content that came before that they've learned. So yeah, it doesn't know that it's, I don't think it knows.
So like 20 years from now, we'll have a hit series on the new pizzeria in Gaza.
We'll have to credit him, though, for that, right? Because the idea was human.
Hi, my name is Logan West, and I'm a research fellow with the Danube Institute. When it comes to matter of AI versus human writers, we've talked about it a lot from the writer's perspective, but Katherine, you briefly touched on this when it comes to the audience perspective, to the consumer's perspective. And as you said, a lot of the times they may not be able to tell the difference. Is there anything to lean on that would make them desire the human writer more than the AI writer? Is there any aspect to a story that they could clearly differentiate and make them desire the human writer more?
And that's a great question. I think that it's just like with any movie, right? There's movies that are very formulaic. There's movies that are those, the comic book movies that are just sort of formulaic. And they will find an audience, and people won't be able to discern the difference. I think the things that make people really connect are these like very emotional human experiences, things that resonate with you personally. Sometimes it's so specific, right? That specific detail in a movie or a story that could only come from some human experience that we share. I think that's something that will remain human. Whereas the machine, it's going to be better at maybe writing action scenes. I can't write action scenes.
I have never read a script written by artificial intelligence, so I don't know the difference.
Well, people kept telling me that I would be replaced just even as a journalist. right? And the reason that I'm criticizing AI is because, I'm just afraid of losing my job. And look, it's going to replace a lot of journalists, but because it's going to replace certain kinds of writing. The things that I write, I tried to fool my audience at some point, and I tried to generate some articles, and they can tell the difference, because the awkwardness that I sometimes have, the kind of oddness, the weirdness, how I phrase things, it is distinct to me, and they connect to it, or not, but that's what makes me me. And I think and the ideas, the thoughts, that comes from a human being. And the AI is not going to be able to do that, at least not yet. Who knows? I can't predict the future. But that's the kind of thing that human beings are able to generally catch, just not everyone.
Hello, good evening. I'm Alex Stemp. I'm a sort of journalist and blogger here in Budapest. I'm originally from England. I've really enjoyed this evening. Thank you very much for this illuminating debate. I just want to speak about sort of political correctness and the fact that it's become a bit old hat now. I think it cannot save everybody. It might be taken over by AI by some form or other. But I just want to give an example. Much emphasis is given to like sort of gay community, coloured communities, all these kind of people. But if you look at me, I am tall. My wife is also tall. I've got 3 kids who are particularly tall. And you can't make jokes about people who are gay or disabled or whatever, but at school, everyone makes jokes about my kids because they are tall. So what will the political correct lobby do about that? I just have no idea. So that's just so it can't save everyone. So it's a bit of a bubble, and I hope one day it will burst, and so we can have great movies here again to replace these sort of rather shallower ones with all this editing. And the second point is I've got a script, a sort of strong Hungarian English kind of psychological comedy script, which, if there's a chance, I'd like to present to you, sort of send you a mini synopsis of it, if I can, after this break. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Well, tall people, I feel like I'm so tempted to make a tall joke. No, I'm kidding. I do think that the answer, because look, I believe in being considerate and polite and all those things, but I think also resilience is very important, and I think we need to focus on that more, and also the intentionality of jokes, because sometimes you counter a joke and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe this person said it, and it's a brilliant, funny joke, and it's not trying to hurt people. Like, I watched Book of Mormon, my jaw dropped at some of the things that they said, but it wasn't mean-spirited. And I think that's the distinct difference.
And we have time for one last question, I believe, or two.
Okay, I'll be fast. I'm Theo Bash, aspiring member of Danube Institute. Very quick comments. Number 1, greatest Christian movie of all time, Jesus Christ Superstar. You guys can talk about Bryant as long as you want. About AI, the most horrifying one is the Terminator. It's going for a long time, inspiring fear into us. But I want to reach the subject of an elephant in the room. There's always one when there is a conference. And it is a Chinese influence on Hollywood, which was not mentioned at all. So that's my question. Now, before, I have another one, okay. We can see an extreme rise in anti-Semitism for many reasons. I'm not talking about the pizza store in Gaza, because that would be a subject I can talk about for hours. But I'm talking about Hollywood. Hollywood has been a Jewish citadel for a long time. And I'm being Jewish and I'm not being anti-Semitic. Will there be changes because of what's happening in the world? Will you feel any changes based on that? These were the 2 questions.
Hollywood was built by Jews coming from Central Europe. The Warner Brothers, they were Polish. William Fox was Hungarian. Adolf Cukor was Hungarian. MGM was Russian, and they were all such poor people that the only industry, they couldn't make it in the banking or elegant businesses, so they said, okay, they bought up all these Nickelodeons and made a nickel and a dime, and then ultimately built Hollywood. And when they couldn't pay their Kodak bills anymore, they moved out to LA because they were far enough, they didn't have to pay their bills. So yes, fundamentally, Hollywood was created by Jews, and it's a strong Jewish community. I don't live in LA now. I haven't been in at least 20 years. No, maybe less, 15. So I wouldn't be able to judge it. But I would be surprised if anti-Semitism in Hollywood has risen. What do you say?
I mean, it's always been around, and of course, that's a big topic. But and like you said, it was an industry that was built in part because it was not a desirable industry. It just got made into a desirable industry over time. On the China side, I have just a little bit of insight into that, but I have met some of the funders from China. And something that they were trying to do, and they weren't hiding it, is that they really were trying to work with Hollywood because they were trying to learn from Hollywood, and they were looking to finance a lot of movies that were kind of Hollywood movies. They have cultural differences, and they couldn't really quite transpass them on their own, so they would hire a lot of people, either invest in movies or hire a lot of people to sort of teach them how to do animation, how to do other kinds of storytelling, script writing, and the intention was to spread some of the kind of ideas and ideology that they have into Hollywood. I don't know where it's at the moment, but at the time where I was looking at it, it was pretty. They were pretty interested in it. They were putting a lot of money into it. But
as far as I know, they didn't really get anywhere. Alibaba was planning to buy up studios and major corporations, but that didn't work out. And right now, China and the USA are not on very friendly terms.
No, and I wrote a story, for example, about. I wrote a little bit about this topic, but for example, they did animation that had a lot of big Hollywood names. It just never quite took it, So because they also have a lot of things that they have to put in that are cultural sensitivities. And I think the combination of working with China and Americans, it just never, it didn't work out as far as I've noticed.
I did read today in preparing for this evening that both China and India produce more movies per year than the United States, than Hollywood. But the Hollywood movies nevertheless seem to be out-earning them to date. But that might change
it does better internationally,
in the near future. At least conceivably. I believe we have one last question from our very own Melissa O'Sullivan. No, in that case, please give our distinguished guests a round of applause.